It was supposed to be a quiet morning. A woman watering her plants on the rooftop of her own building. But when a call comes in, and a cop with a chip on his shoulder shows up, it all spirals into something far more sinister. What starts as a so-called routine check turns into a humiliating arrest. But what he doesn't know is the woman he just cuffed isn't just a tenant. She's the owner. And not only that. She's the very person who once saved his child's life. What unfolds next is a collision of prejudice, legacy, and long-buried family secrets. That'll leave you stunned. Trust me, you're not ready for this ending, but it's coming. So sit back, turn up the volume. And tell us in the comments what time you're listening. And where in the world you're watching from. We read every one. It was the kind of morning Savannah is famous for. Soft light spilling over cobblestone streets. The sweet scent of gardenias drifting through the breeze. And a kind of calm that made you believe the world was still good. On the rooftop of a luxury apartment building, tucked between centuries-old oaks and wrought iron balconies, a woman stood alone watering her flowers. Her name was Eleanor Grace. 76 years old, elegant, composed. Her silver hair was tucked neatly into a French twist. And though she wore a simple cream blouse and linen pants, everything about her radiated quiet dignity. To those who knew her, she wasn't just another elderly woman enjoying her retirement. She was a legend. One of Savannah's most successful black property investors. A philanthropist. A woman who had spent her entire life turning hardship into triumph. But none of that mattered to the stranger watching her from behind a curtain, 2 floors below. Within minutes, a call was made to 911. There's someone up on the rooftop, doesn't look like she belongs. The neighbor said. Might be casing the building, better send someone quick. What she didn't say, but everyone understood, was that she didn't believe a black woman had any business being alone on that rooftop in the first place. It didn't take long before a patrol car pulled up out front. Sirens didn't wail. But the red and blue lights silently swept across the brick facade like a warning. Officer Travis Hull stepped out. 38 years old, clean-shaven, boots polished to regulation shine. To him, this was just another call, another Tuesday. He had no idea that this morning would shake the very core of what he thought he knew about himself. He took the elevator to the top floor. Shoulders squared, hand resting near his hip just in case. As the doors opened, he stepped onto the rooftop garden and saw her. Eleanor humming softly to herself. Tending to a small patch of white jasmine. She looked up as he approached. "Can I help you, officer?" she asked, her voice smooth but cautious. Hull didn't answer right away. He scanned the area. Too nice, too perfect, and her, too calm. He narrowed his eyes. "Ma'am, do you live here?" Eleanor tilted her head, confused by the tone. "Yes, I do." "This building?" "Yes, penthouse 12A. Hull folded his arms. "Do you have identification on you?" She smiled politely. "No, I left it inside. I wasn't expecting company." He didn't smile back. "I'm going to need to see proof," he said firmly. "I understand," she replied. "If you'll come down with me, I'll be happy to show you." But Hull didn't move. His fingers tapped against his duty belt. He looked at her, really looked at her. And saw only what his biases let him see. Not the woman who built a real estate empire. Not the mentor to dozens of young black entrepreneurs. Not the face behind the scholarship fund that had sent dozens of kids to college. No, he saw a trespasser. "I'll need you to put your hands where I can see them." "Excuse me?" "Hands, now." Eleanor blinked, stunned, but she didn't argue. She set down her watering can and raised her hands. Slow, deliberate, dignified. "I think there's been a mistake," she said. "I'll decide that," Hole muttered, pulling out his cuffs. From behind the patio wall, a neighbor peered out with her phone, recording everything. Another one gasped, recognizing her. "That's Ms. Grace," someone whispered. "She owns the whole damn building." But Hole didn't hear them. Or maybe he didn't care. He reached for her wrist. Eleanor flinched, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, something older. A memory she'd spent decades trying to forget. The feeling of cold steel against warm skin. "You're hurting me," she said quietly. "I'm doing my job," he snapped. She didn't resist, not once. She simply looked at him with eyes that had seen more injustice than he could begin to understand. The cuffs clicked shut. In that moment, everything shifted around them. Tenants gathered, phones out, murmuring, filming. One older man called out. "You're making a mistake, officer. That woman paid for my grandbaby's surgery." But Hole stood firm. "If she's who she says she is, it'll be cleared up." As he escorted Eleanor through the lobby, silence fell. The elevator seemed to hum louder than usual. Eleanor walked with her head held high. Her wrists stiff behind her back. Her steps unshaken. But inside, her heart was heavy. She had built a life with grace, with patience, with resilience. But here she was again, having to prove that she belonged. And Hole, he still thought he was doing the right thing. Still thought he was in control. He had no idea, the woman he just arrested wasn't just an innocent grandmother tending to her plants. She was the benefactor who had once saved his daughter's life. But sometimes the truth takes its time. And when it hits, it doesn't knock, it crashes. So keep watching. Because this story, it's only just begun. It should have ended right there on the rooftop. A simple apology. A moment of humility. A quiet walk back down the stairs with dignity intact. But it didn't. Because something inside Officer Travis Hole refused to yield. Maybe it was his pride. Maybe it was his stress, too many unpaid bills. Too many nights lying awake wondering if the job was worth it anymore. Or maybe it was something deeper. Something buried beneath the badge and uniform. A belief unspoken, unchallenged. That a woman like Eleanor Grace couldn't possibly be who she said she was. As the elevator doors closed with a soft ding, the tension hung heavy in the air. Eleanor stood motionless. Hands still cuffed behind her back. Her silver hair catching the sunlight as it filtered through the glass ceiling. Hole stared straight ahead. Jaw tight, eyes avoiding hers. "You don't have to do this," she said calmly. "You're making a mistake." He didn't respond. Not with words. But his silence spoke volumes. They reached the ground floor. The elevator opened to the marble lobby, where a doorman in a navy blazer stood frozen in disbelief. His mouth opened to protest. But Eleanor gave him a slight shake of her head. "Not now. Let it be." A pair of tenants gasped. One older woman dropped her mail. Another fumbled with her phone, trying to turn on the camera. "Ms. Grace," someone said, "what's going on?" Still she said nothing. Not out of fear. Out of principle. If this was going to happen, she'd meet it with grace. Outside, Hole opened the back door of the cruiser. Eleanor paused before stepping in. She looked out over the block she'd lived on for more than 20 years. She knew every tree, every brick in the sidewalk. She remembered the day she signed the deed to the building. The day her foundation awarded its first scholarship. The day the mayor named a park bench in her honor. Now, neighbors were watching her like a criminal. She lowered herself into the back seat with quiet dignity. Hole slammed the door shut. On the way to the precinct, the silence between them grew louder. Hole stared at the road. Hands clenched tight around the steering wheel. Trying to justify what he'd just done. She didn't have ID. She was in a restricted area. She didn't follow instructions. It all sounded convincing. Until he heard his own thoughts echoing in his head. Hollow. Rehearsed. Defensive. At a red light, he glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She sat still, her eyes looking out the window. Not scared, not angry. Just disappointed. And for reasons he couldn't understand. That cut deeper than anything else. They pulled into the station parking lot. As he opened her door, Eleanor turned to him and said softly, "I hope for your sake that you figure out what today really means." He didn't answer. Inside the precinct, heads turned. A few officers glanced at Hole, then at Eleanor. No one said anything. But the questions were written across their faces. Is that? Did he really bring her in? Hole led her to a holding bench near the booking desk. She sat without complaint. He began the paperwork. Name. Address. Reason for detainment. He couldn't even bring himself to write trespassing without hesitation. "You know," said an older officer walking by. "You might want to double-check who that is." Hole shrugged him off. "I did my job." The officer gave him a long look. "Hope so." Time ticked on. Eleanor sat silently, hands still behind her back. A young female officer offered her a glass of water. She took it with a nod and thanked her kindly. The young woman looked to Hole, as if asking permission. But Hole just waved her away. Then came the moment that would change everything. As Hole prepared to submit the incident report, he opened the small purse Eleanor had carried. Inside was a single gold locket, with the letters LMG etched into the surface. He paused. That engraving, it stirred something in his memory. Something distant, but sharp. LMG. He couldn't place it, but it nagged at him. Suddenly his phone buzzed. It was a call from home. He hesitated, then answered. Travis, it was his wife Emily, her voice shaky. "Yeah. There's something I need to tell you. The hospital just called." "What hospital?" "Memorial General. They said the balance is gone. All of it. The surgery, the aftercare, everything." "What? What do you mean it's gone?" "Paid off by a foundation." "A woman." "The LMG Foundation." Hole's heart dropped. "What did you say?" "They said, a woman named Eleanor Grace made the donation, Travis. She saved our daughter's life." Hole stood there frozen. The locket still in his hand. He looked across the room. To where Eleanor sat, calm, quiet, dignified. And it hit him. The woman he had just arrested. The woman he accused of lying. The woman he put in handcuffs on her own property. Had once written a check that saved his family from ruin. His knees felt weak. He hung up the phone and slowly walked over to her. Her eyes met his. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. Just looked. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I know," she said. "I didn't mean to." "You did," she interrupted gently. "You meant to do exactly what you did. Because in that moment, everything about me offended everything you expected. The way I looked, the way I dressed, the way I stood my ground. You didn't know my name. But you thought you knew who I was." Hole swallowed hard. The weight of her words crashing into him. "I'm so sorry." She looked away, then back again. "Sorry isn't the end of this story, Officer Hole. It's the beginning." And just like that, the world he thought he knew cracked open. The woman in the back of his car wasn't just a citizen. She was a mirror. And everything he saw reflected back. He wasn't sure he liked. They say there's a moment, just one, When everything you believe about yourself can begin to unravel. For Officer Travis Hole, that moment had already arrived. He just didn't know what to do with it yet. Back inside the precinct. The mood was colder now. Not just from the air conditioning humming overhead. But from the silence between him and Elena Grace. She sat patiently on the bench in the holding area. Her posture as regal as if she were sitting in a private parlor. And not a grey-walled booking room. Her wrists still bore faint red marks from the handcuffs. But she never asked to have them treated. Never even mentioned the discomfort. It wasn't her first encounter with injustice. And that was the real tragedy. Hole busied himself behind the desk. Shuffling papers, rechecking boxes. Anything to keep from looking at her. But the problem wasn't on the forms. It was sitting right across the room. One by one, his colleagues walked past. Some glanced at Elena and kept going. But a few slowed down. One detective, tall and lean, with years etched into the creases around his eyes, muttered under his breath as he passed. That woman's name rings a bell. Another paused beside Hole's desk and leaned in. You sure you know who that is? Hole didn't answer. Because he wasn't sure of anything anymore. What he did know was that the locket in the evidence tray still sat there. Gold, delicate, engraved with the initials LMG. The same initials on the foundation that had, as he now knew, saved his daughter from a lifetime of surgeries and debt. And the woman who funded it all. She was sitting in the next room. While he stood there trying to process the consequences of his own mistake. An internal affairs officer walked by. The buzz was already spreading. The air shifted. And Hole felt it. He walked slowly to the holding area. Opened the door. And stepped inside. Mrs. Grace, he said quietly. She looked up, her gaze steady. Yes, Officer Hole. He held out her ID. Which they'd finally retrieved from her apartment after confirming her identity. Not that it should have taken any confirmation. The woman had her name on the building directory. She owned the penthouse. She owned the building. She paid the taxes. She funded half the scholarships at the local community college. Her face was in the newspaper last year for donating $2 million to the city's housing initiative. And he had cuffed her like a shoplifter. He started. But the words clung to the walls of his throat. Your documentation checks out. She raised an eyebrow. Of course it does. He nodded, swallowing a lump of shame. You're free to go. For a second, she didn't move. Then she slowly rose from the bench. Retrieved her handbag. And gently took the gold locket from the tray. She turned it over in her hand. Looked at the inscription. Then looked at him. Do you know what this is? She asked. He hesitated. I do now. It belonged to my late husband, she said. He gave it to me the day we bought our first home together. Said, from now on, wherever you go, our love goes with you. She paused. Funny, isn't it? That the thing meant to remind me of love. Ended up sitting on an evidence tray. Hole opened his mouth. But she lifted a hand. I'm not done. He closed his mouth and listened. I've been stopped before, she said. Followed in stores. Asked how I afforded my home. Accused of using someone else's credit card. I'm not unfamiliar with what happened today. But I never expected it to happen here. Not in my own building. Not by someone whose family I once helped. The words pierced him like ice through skin. I didn't know, he said softly. No, she replied. You didn't. But it's not about what you didn't know. It's about what you chose not to see. You saw a woman who didn't look like she belonged. That's all it took. She slipped the locket into her purse and began walking toward the door. He followed, quiet, unsure of whether he should apologize again or just fade into the background. At the exit, she paused and turned back to him. "Officer Hole," she said. "I'm not here to ruin your career. I don't need revenge. But I want you to understand something. This job of yours. It isn't just about writing tickets or making arrests. It's about judgment. It's about power. And you used yours to reinforce a world where people like me are always suspect until proven otherwise." He looked down, ashamed. "Are we done?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She gave a small, polite smile. One without warmth. "Then I'll see myself out." And she did. As she walked through the lobby and into the warm Savannah afternoon, a few officers quietly watched. One whispered, "That's Elena Grace." Another muttered, "Damn, I thought she moved out years ago." She didn't look back. Not once. Back in the office, Hull returned to his desk. Sat down. And stared at the empty evidence tray. The locket was gone. But the weight of it lingered in the room. Heavier than a badge. Sharper than regret. He opened a browser on his department computer and typed in LMG Foundation. The first link. Eleanor Grace. The woman behind Savannah's most generous charity. He clicked through photos. Her standing with city leaders. With cancer patients. With students in caps and gowns. With children holding laptops and smiling. And there it was. A press release from 3 years ago. The foundation had covered the medical costs for a little girl named Lucy Hull. His daughter. He leaned back in his chair, stunned. The woman he detained had already once saved his family. And he treated her like a threat that night, Hull didn't sleep. He sat in the dark with a glass of water in his hand. Staring out the window. His wife came into the room and sat beside him. She didn't ask what was wrong. She already knew. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked gently. He nodded. And for the first time, he did. He told her everything. About the rooftop. About the cuffs. About the way Elena had looked at him. Not with hatred. But with disappointment. About the locket. The foundation. The irony. The pain. His wife listened. Held his hand. And said only one thing. "So what are you going to do now?" He didn't answer. Not yet. But deep down, something had already shifted. And once that shift begins, there's no turning back. Because regret is a powerful thing. But so is redemption. And Officer Hull was about to find out what it really takes to earn it. The next morning should have been routine. But it wasn't. News travels fast in a precinct. Faster when it involves someone powerful. And by the time Officer Hull walked through the front doors, word had already made its way through the station halls like wildfire. The woman he'd arrested the day before wasn't just some wealthy retiree. She was the Elena Grace. The Elena Grace, whose name was etched into park benches, library wings, scholarships, and housing developments all across Savannah. A woman who'd sat on advisory boards with state senators, hosted charity galas with Fortune 500 CEOs, and whose foundation had paid medical bills for half the people in the city who couldn't afford them. Including, as Hull had painfully learned, his own daughter. Now every glance in the squad room felt heavier. Some colleagues avoided his eyes. Others whispered just loud enough for him to hear. "Did you hear? He cuffed her on the rooftop. Man, how do you not know who Elena Grace is? Not just a mistake, that's career suicide." He dropped his gear at his desk and opened the incident report from the day before. Just staring at it made his stomach twist. Every line on the page. The probable cause. The detainment notes. The arresting justification. It all read like a list of assumptions. Wrong place. Wrong time. Wrong skin. And all under the name of the woman who'd once saved his family. Before he could finish rereading it, Captain Wallace called him into the office. She was a no-nonsense leader. The kind who didn't raise her voice unless someone really messed up. But this morning, her tone was colder than usual. "Shut the door," she said. Hull obeyed, standing stiff in front of her desk. "Do you know who Eleanor Grace is?" she asked. Not looking up from the tablet in her hands. "I do now," he said, voice low. She let out a bitter chuckle. "You should have known yesterday." He didn't argue. What could he say? "She's on the mayor's Civilian Oversight Committee," Wallace continued. "She's funded more police reform grants than I can count. Hell, half this precinct's de-escalation training was paid for by her foundation." Hull swallowed hard. "I'm not suspending you," she said. "Not yet. But the mayor's office is asking questions. Civil rights groups are drafting statements. And local media. They're already sniffing around. You gave them a story." "I wasn't trying to," he said. She cut him off. "It doesn't matter what you were trying to do. You put cuffs on a 76-year-old woman on her own rooftop. After ignoring her when she told you where she lived. And now that woman, someone respected, might sue this department. I didn't know." "That's the problem," she said, looking up sharply. "You didn't know. And you didn't stop to think. You had a chance to listen. You had a chance to ask questions. But you chose control over compassion." Hull's mouth went dry. "Do you have anything else to say?" He didn't. Wallace exhaled and leaned back. "She's not pressing charges, yet. But if she does, Internal Affairs is going to dig through every complaint with your name on it. And if there's a pattern, you won't have a badge this time next year." Hull left the office feeling like the ground under him had shifted. Because it had. The image of himself. The good cop. The decent one. The guy who followed the rules. Was cracking. He'd always believed he was fair, impartial. That he judged people based on behavior, not appearance. But the mirror was telling him something different now. And Eleanor Grace had been the one to hold it up. That afternoon, while sorting through old case files at his desk, another officer walked by and tapped the edge of Hull's monitor. "City Hall just called," he said. "You're being requested." "Me?" "Yeah. Upstairs. Right now." Hull stood, unsure what was waiting for him. A reprimand. A lawsuit. A media ambush. But instead, when he arrived at the small conference room on the second floor, he saw something that stopped him cold. Eleanor Grace. Sitting at the table. Calm. Composed. Waiting. She looked up when he entered. But didn't offer a smile. "I asked them to bring you," she said. He stepped inside slowly, closing the door behind him. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon," he said quietly. "I wanted to talk. Without cameras. Without press. Just you and me." Hull nodded and sat across from her. The air thick with tension. "I'm not here to humiliate you," she said. "I'm not here to destroy your job. But I need to understand something. Why did you treat me the way you did?" He looked down. I saw someone who didn't seem to belong. That's the truth." "And what made you think I didn't belong?" she asked. He hesitated. "Was it my age? My skin? My clothes? My silence?" she pressed. "All of it," he admitted, ashamed. It wasn't right. But that's what I saw. She studied him for a long moment. Then she leaned forward. You don't realize what it feels like, she said. To build something. To survive everything this world throws at you. And still be seen as suspicious. Do you know how exhausting that is? He shook his head. I'm starting to. No, she said softly. You're starting to see the edge of it. The real work comes after this. He looked up. What do I do? He asked. How do I fix it? You don't fix it in one day, she replied. You fix it by changing how you see. How you listen. You fix it by admitting that even good people can have bad reflexes. She stood slowly and gathered her purse. I'll be watching, she said. Not because I want revenge. But because I believe people can change. She walked past him. Paused at the door. And added one last thing. You've got a long road ahead of you, Officer Hole. I suggest you start walking. And with that, she left. Leaving behind only the echo of truth. And the first step toward redemption. Sometimes the deepest wounds aren't the ones that bleed. They're the ones that linger. The ones that echo when everything else falls silent. Officer Travis Hole couldn't stop thinking about what Eleanor Grace had said to him. You fix it by changing how you see. That line haunted him. Not because it was cruel. Because it wasn't. It was honest. And honesty, especially the kind that holds up a mirror, can be the heaviest thing to carry. He spent the evening alone on his porch, staring into the twilight sky, wondering how many other faces he'd passed without truly seeing. How many people had he brushed past, questioned, doubted, dismissed? Just because of a feeling. A suspicion. A bias he never even admitted he had. And worse. How many people didn't have the voice or platform Eleanor had? The realization sat heavy in his chest. Like stone. Yet, that night, something shifted. Something small. But undeniable. It started with a drawer. An old one at the back of his bedroom closet. Inside were belongings he hadn't touched in years. Papers from the academy. Photos from his early days on the force. And tucked beneath a stack of awards. A sealed envelope. He knew exactly what it was. It had come from his father's estate after he passed. A letter his dad had written but never mailed. He'd never opened it. Couldn't. His relationship with his father had always been distant. Respectful but cold. There were things they never talked about. Regrets they never unpacked. But tonight felt different. Hands slightly trembling. Hole opened the envelope. The handwriting was his father's. Neat, heavy pressure on the strokes. Just like the man himself. It read. Son. There are things I never found the courage to tell you. Mistakes I made. People I hurt. I wasn't always the man you think I was. There was a family I left behind. Not because I didn't love them. But because I didn't believe they could love me after everything I'd done. If one day you ever meet someone wearing a gold necklace with the initials LMG. Remember this. That's your blood. That's your family. Hole read the lines 3 times. Then again. His heart thudded. That necklace. Eleanor's necklace. Engraved with LMG. It wasn't just the name of her foundation. It was a name. A person. A family connection. His fingers clutched the letter tighter. As another memory returned. Faint like sunlight through fog. A photograph. Black and white. His father as a boy. Sitting on the lap of a smiling man with the same calm eyes Hole saw in the mirror every morning. That man wore a gold necklace. Same shape. Same initials. His chest tightened. Could it be? He sat up, heart pounding. And grabbed his phone. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. An old friend of his father's who worked at city archives. "Hey, it's Travis. I need a favor." "What kind?" "I need to trace a family name." My dad sighed. "Johnson." "Common name," the friend replied. "Anything else?" "Yes. His sister. Her name might have been Eleanor." There was silence on the line. "You sure about that?" "No," Hole admitted. "But I need to be." The next morning, while waiting on a call back, Hole drove across town to a quiet office building nestled behind oak trees. He didn't wear his uniform. He didn't want a badge to get in the way of what he was about to do. He was going to see her. Ella Laner. He parked in front of a small historic building. The headquarters of the LMG Foundation. It was quiet, tasteful, elegant. Just like its founder. Inside, he found her assistant, who gave him a cautious glance. "I don't think Mrs. Grace is expecting visitors. Tell her it's Travis Hole. And I'm not here for work." A few minutes passed. Then, surprisingly, the assistant returned and nodded. "She'll see you upstairs." Eleanor was sitting at a round table near a large window, sorting through donation letters. The sunlight hit her silver hair just right, giving her a soft, almost regal glow. Hole stepped inside, holding the letter from his father in his hand. "You again," she said. Calm but guarded. He nodded. "Me again. What brings you here this time? Looking for more apologies to hand out?" "No," he said softly. "Looking for answers." She tilted her head. He handed her the letter. She read it slowly. Her hands didn't shake. But her eyes glistened. When she finished, she looked up at him. With a mixture of shock. And something deeper. Something ancient. Recognition. "My brother's name," she whispered, "was James Johnson." Hole sat down. "I think he was my father." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Just the quiet hum of the city outside the window. And the slow, deliberate rhythm of realization sinking in. "Your eyes," she finally said. "You have his eyes." "I never knew," Hole replied. He never talked about family. Only once, he mentioned a sister. But I thought maybe he'd made it up. He was quiet like that. She leaned back, tears welling but not falling. "My brother disappeared from our lives. No note, no call, no goodbye. He just vanished. I think he carried a lot of shame," Hole said. "Maybe he thought he didn't deserve to go back." They sat in silence. The air thick with a grief neither had prepared for. "I arrested you," Hole finally said. "I humiliated you. And now I find out you're the only family I have left." Ella Laner didn't smile. But she didn't turn away either. "You're right," she said. "You did arrest me. You judged me without knowing me. And you caused pain." She placed a hand gently over the letter. "But you're here now. And sometimes. That's a start." Hole looked down, emotions swirling. Regret. Confusion. Something like hope. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "You don't fix it," she replied. "You earn it. With time. With truth. With change." Then, quietly, Ella Laner did something neither of them expected. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. And beginnings, no matter how late, are still beginnings. It's one thing to discover the truth. It's another to know what to do with it. Officer Travis Hole left Eleanor Grace's office with a letter in his pocket and a knot in his chest. His father, James Johnson, had vanished decades ago, leaving behind a sister who never stopped hoping, and a son who never knew she existed. Now the weight of that legacy pressed on Hole like a boulder strapped to his shoulders. He didn't sleep that night. He sat up in the living room while the house lay quiet, staring at old photos, flipping through worn memories. Every time he saw his father's face, he wondered, what if James had come back? What if pride hadn't kept him away? And more importantly, was he about to repeat the same mistake? The next morning, Hole found himself standing at Eleanor's door again. No badge. No uniform. Just a worn denim shirt, khakis. And an expression that said he wasn't there to be a cop. He was there to be a man trying to make things right. Eleanor answered the door. This time with no hesitation. She didn't invite him in immediately. She just looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "What are you looking for, Travis?" she asked. "I'm not sure," he said honestly. "But I was hoping you'd let me listen." She stepped aside and opened the door. That was her way of saying yes. The living room was warm and inviting. Nothing extravagant, but filled with character. Framed photos lined the shelves, none of which he'd seen before. A younger Eleanor, full of ambition. A man beside her. Her husband, he assumed. And in every corner of the room, books, records, tiny keepsakes. A lifetime of resilience wrapped in oak and sunlight. He sat on the edge of the couch, unsure of what to say first. Eleanor walked over to a cabinet, pulled out a small wooden box, and set it on the coffee table between them. "If we're going to do this," she said, "then let's start with the truth." She opened the box slowly. Inside were letters. Old, faded. Most in James' handwriting. There were photographs too. Black and white shots of children laughing. One of a teenage Eleanor and her brother. Arms around each other. Both smiling like the world couldn't touch them. "He used to make me laugh," she said. Almost to herself. "Back when things were hard. When we didn't have anything. He had this way of making the world feel lighter." Hole reached in and picked up one of the photos. It was a group picture, probably taken in the 70s. There, in the middle, was James Johnson. His father. Grinning wide. Holding a young girl on his hip. Hole stared at it like it was a window into a parallel life. One he never knew existed. "Why do you think he left?" he asked quietly. Eleanor folded her hands. "I've spent years asking that same question," she said. "At first, I thought maybe he was ashamed. Then angry. But over time, I realized some people just run. From pain. From failure. From love." She looked at Hole. "And some stay too angry to forgive them." The words sat between them like fog. "I don't want to be like him," Hole said. Eleanor nodded. "Then don't." He looked at her, searching for some trace of resentment in her eyes. But there was none. Only weariness. And wisdom. "I arrested you," he said. "I humiliated you. I judged you without cause. And now I sit here, expecting you to help me understand my father." She leaned back, letting the question breathe. "No," she said. "I don't owe you that. But I owe him the truth. And I owe myself peace. So if you're here to understand, not to justify, then I'll tell you what I can." She reached for another envelope from the box and handed it to him. "This one," she said. "He wrote a few months before disappearing. Hole opened it slowly. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. The ink had smudged in places. But the message was still legible. Ellie. I wish I could tell you what went wrong. I wish I could say I was strong enough to stay. But I wasn't. You were always the heart of this family. The fighter. The one who made sure we didn't break when life tried to pull us apart. I think I ran because I wasn't you. I didn't believe I could be forgiven. If I never get to say this in person. Thank you for loving me. Even when I didn't deserve it. When Hole finished reading. His chest ached with the weight of those words. Eleanor wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. Not one of sorrow. But release. I held on to that for decades, she said. Angry, heartbroken. But now, maybe I can let it go. Hole looked around the room again. What made you start the foundation? He asked. She smiled faintly. My mother, Evelyn. She always believed healing was a greater strength than vengeance. Said it takes more courage to forgive than to fight. She sounds like someone I wish I'd met. She'd have liked you, Eleanor said. But only if you earned it. They both chuckled lightly. The tension that had been coiled so tightly finally began to loosen. I want to be better, Hole said. Not just for me. For my daughter. For what this badge is supposed to stand for. Eleanor looked at him. Really looked. And saw something she hadn't expected to see in him. Sincerity. That's a good start, she said. But change doesn't come from saying the right things. It comes from doing them. I want to do more than say sorry, Hole replied. I want to prove that I'm not the man who put you in cuffs. Or if I was. That I'm not him anymore. She nodded slowly, thinking. Then she stood and walked to a tall bookshelf. Pulling out a folder labeled, Community Initiatives. I've been wanting to expand the foundation, she said. More outreach. More training. Especially with law enforcement. But I need someone who understands both sides of the street. Someone who's walked it. You want me to help? I want you to show me you can help, she said. We'll start small. Workshops, talks, listening sessions. You don't lead. You listen. You learn. Then we see. Hole stood too. The weight of the moment settling into his bones. I'm in, he said. Whatever you need. She extended her hand. Then let's get to work. Their hands met in a firm shake. And for the first time, Travis Hole didn't feel like a man chasing forgiveness. He felt like a man earning it. They say when you finally see the truth, it changes everything. But truth isn't the finish line. It's the starting point. For Travis Hole. That truth had shaken the foundation of who he thought he was. A cop. A father. A man who believed he was fair. But now he stood on the other side of all that. No longer trying to defend his past. But trying to understand it. And with every new step. Eleanor Grace was right there. Challenging him. Guiding him. Refusing to let him fall back into comfort. It began with the little things. Sitting in the back of community meetings. Not speaking. Just listening. Reading every word of the Foundation's outreach proposals. Walking through neighborhoods he used to patrol. But this time. Without the badge. Without the belt. Just a clipboard and a notebook. Asking real questions. What do you need? What have we failed to hear? How do we do better? The first few times. The looks were cold. Suspicious. People remembered his face. Some had seen the video from that rooftop incident. An elderly black woman being handcuffed by a white cop in her own building. Others had simply heard the story and filled in the blanks themselves. But Hole didn't flinch. He didn't explain it away. He took the looks. The silence. The discomfort. Because that was part of the work. One afternoon, he joined Ella Laner at a community healing circle. An event she held monthly where people shared stories of being profiled, dismissed, or disrespected by the very systems meant to protect them. Hole sat in the circle, shoulder to shoulder with men and women he used to drive past in squad cars. People who remembered being pulled over without cause. Who remembered being followed in stores. Who remembered the quiet, lingering sting of being treated like a threat before being seen as a person. They didn't know who he was at first. Then one woman leaned forward and squinted. "Wait, I know you. You're the one who cuffed Ms. Grace, aren't you?" The room went still. Hole didn't look away. "Yes," he said. "That was me." The silence thickened. The weight of it settling on every shoulder. "Why are you here then?" someone else asked. "Because I need to be," he answered. "Because I can't undo what I did. But I can face it. And maybe, if you'll let me, I can learn how not to do it again." That moment. Raw. Real. Uncomfortable. Changed everything. Because they didn't see a cop trying to save his image. They saw a man trying to change his soul. Afterward, Ella Laner pulled him aside. "You handled that well," she said. "I didn't know if I could," he admitted. "You don't have to be fearless," she said. "Just honest." That became their rhythm. Each week, they'd meet at the Foundation's office. Sometimes in the early mornings. Sometimes late into the night. Mapping out what reform really meant. Not just in policies. But in people. In training. In culture. It was during one of those long evenings that Hole asked her something that had been sitting on his chest for days. "Do you think my father ever tried to come back?" Ella Laner looked up from her notes, surprised. "I don't know," she said honestly. "There were times I thought I saw him in a crowd. Or imagined a letter would arrive. But he never did." She paused. "But I used to believe he didn't care. Now I'm not so sure." Hole leaned back in his chair. "I found something else," he said. "In that same box of his. Another letter. This one addressed to me." He reached into his satchel and handed her a folded piece of paper. She opened it slowly. It was short. Handwritten. Faded with time. "Son. If you ever find Ella Laner, treat her like the family I failed. And if you become a father, be the kind of man I wasn't brave enough to be." Ella Laner's hands trembled. She folded the letter gently. Her fingers pressing against the paper like it was something sacred. "I spent years hating him," she said. "Blaming him. But grief isn't always about losing someone. Sometimes it's about never getting the chance to say goodbye." They sat in silence after that. No more words were needed. The pain between them was mutual. And the healing had finally begun. A few days later, Ella Laner invited Travis to something deeply personal. She was going to visit her mother's grave. She hadn't been back in years. Not since the city renamed the park after Evelyn Grace. The quiet woman who'd raised 2 children during segregation. Worked 3 jobs. And taught Ella Laner that dignity was not what you wore, but how you carried yourself through storms. Hole didn't hesitate. He drove. When they arrived, the cemetery was quiet. Late afternoon sun spilled through the trees. In streaks of gold and amber. Birds chirped in the distance. And the moss hung low from the branches. Like curtains of memory. They walked side by side to a modest gravestone. Evelyn Grace. 1917 to 1989. She believed in the better. Elena knelt and placed a bouquet of white gardenias at the base. She always believed in second chances, she whispered. Even for people who didn't believe in themselves. Hole watched her for a moment. Then slowly reached into his jacket. And pulled out something wrapped in a velvet cloth. He unfolded it carefully. A small brass nameplate. I had this made, he said. For your family. For mine. She read the inscription. From broken roots, we grew something stronger. In memory of James and Evelyn. Elena pressed her hand to her heart. Then nodded. Together, they fixed the plate into the earth beside the stone. Quietly. Respectfully. The wind picked up. Soft but firm. As if the world was offering its own gentle approval. Hole stood back. Letting the moment settle deep inside him. This wasn't redemption. Not yet. But it was reverence. And that, maybe, was where redemption begins. As they walked back to the car. Elena turned to him. There's still a long road ahead. I know, he said. But I'm not walking it alone anymore. She looked at him with something close to pride. No, Travis. You're not. Redemption is not a door you walk through. It's a path you build. One step at a time. Knowing every piece must be laid by hand. With patience. With humility. And with truth. For Travis Hole. That truth no longer haunted him. It pushed him. Elena Grace didn't just offer him forgiveness. She offered him work. And it came not in the form of a badge or a headline. But in something far heavier. Responsibility. Over the following weeks. They moved fast. Elena had a vision. And now she had a partner ready to help bring it to life. The LMG Foundation began drafting a new initiative. Bridges Forward. A program designed to bring law enforcement and community members face to face. Not in confrontation. But in conversation. It started with a listening series. No podiums. No uniforms. Just chairs arranged in a circle. Cops. Teachers. Parents. Teens. Retired veterans. Everyone given the same amount of space to speak. And more importantly, to be heard. Hole didn't lead those sessions. He sat like everyone else. Not as an officer. Not as a symbol. But as a man learning how much he never truly understood. He heard stories of fathers pulled from cars in front of their children. Of teenagers followed through department stores. Of elderly women told they were in the wrong place. Stories that sounded too familiar. And when it was finally Hole's turn to speak. He didn't justify. He didn't defend. He told the truth. I used to think being a good cop meant keeping my record clean, he said. But I see now. Being a good man means facing what's been broken. And doing the work to make it whole again. After that first meeting. An older man came up to him. Wiry, quiet, eyes sharp as glass. You made a mistake, the man said. But you're standing here, not hiding from it. That counts. Hole nodded. I hope it does. The man grinned. It's a start. Word about Bridges Forward began to spread. Elena's network opened doors. Hole's presence gave it weight. They started training programs for rookie officers. Sessions that focused not just on policy. But perception. What it means to walk into a room and assume guilt. What it means to have that same assumption placed on you your entire life. They invited retired officers who'd once stood on the other side of civil rights protests. Young activists just coming into their voice. Pastors, judges. Formerly incarcerated citizens. No one was turned away. The more voices they gathered. the more powerful the message became. One afternoon, during a break between meetings, Hole and Ella Lehner sat in the Foundation's conference room, sipping coffee and reviewing community feedback. These stories, Hole said, tapping the stack of anonymous surveys. They should be required reading for every officer in the academy. Ella Lehner nodded. Maybe they will be. She leaned back, hands clasped in her lap. You know, when I started this foundation, I never imagined someone like you would be sitting across from me helping lead it. I never imagined I'd need it, he replied. She smiled faintly. None of us ever do. Until the moment we realize we're the ones who needed changing all along. There was a long pause. Then she said something he didn't expect. I want you to speak at the next seminar. He blinked. Me? Yes. In uniform. He hesitated. I don't know if I'm ready for that. You're not, she said plainly. But that's why it matters. So that Friday, Hole put on his uniform. Not to patrol. Not to enforce. But to testify. The auditorium was packed. Mostly officers. A few city officials. And in the back rows, members of the community who'd been invited to witness this first-of-its-kind training. When Hole stepped up to the mic, there was no applause. Just silence. He took a deep breath and looked out into the crowd. My name is Officer Travis Hole, he began. And I'm here because I made a mistake that changed my life. I arrested a woman who'd done nothing wrong. A woman who belonged more to this city than I ever did. I didn't see her. I saw my own assumptions. My own fears. And I acted on them. A ripple moved through the crowd. I'm not proud of it, he continued. But I'm standing here because that moment didn't end in silence. It led to something greater. I met the person I wronged. I faced what I had ignored for most of my life. And I've learned this. If you wear this badge, you don't just serve the public. You reflect it. So if your mirror's cracked, don't pretend it's not. Fix it. He stepped back. And the room was still. Then, slowly, a few hands clapped. Then more. Until the room was full of it. Not loud. But honest. After the seminar, a young officer approached him in the hallway. I've only been on the force 6 months, the rookie said. I've already seen things that made me question who I was becoming. Thank you for reminding me who I can be. Hole didn't say much. Just nodded. Because sometimes a nod says what words can't. Later that night, he and Ella Lehner met again in her office. You were brave today, she said. He shook his head. No. Just honest. That's what bravery is. They sat in the quiet for a moment, watching the sun fade behind the city skyline. You ever think this will actually change anything? He asked. Ella Lehner looked over at him. I think it already has. And she was right. Because change isn't always a revolution. Sometimes it's a room full of strangers, listening to someone they once dismissed. Sometimes it's one man willing to stand in front of his own failure and say, here's where I got it wrong. Sometimes it's a conversation that never ends. And for Travis Hole, that conversation had just begun. Change doesn't come in grand declarations. It comes in small, almost invisible choices. Repeated day after day. For Travis Hole, those days were stacking up. His face had become a familiar one around the foundation. Not as a police officer. Not as a cautionary tale. But as someone present. Someone showing up. Not to lead. But to learn. Each week brought new programs. Deeper conversations. And slowly, the community began to shift. Not because wounds had healed. They hadn't. But because someone who once inflicted harm was helping hold the door open for healing to begin. One afternoon, as Hole was setting up chairs for another listening session, a familiar voice called his name. He turned to see a woman in her late 40s. Dressed in scrubs. A hospital badge clipped to her pocket. "You probably don't remember me," she said. "But you pulled me over 10 years ago. Right outside the hospital after a double shift." Hole's stomach tightened. He waited. Not sure if this would be another story he had to carry. "You gave me a ticket for a broken taillight," she said. "But you also followed me to the mechanic. To make sure I got it fixed before my night shift. You didn't say much. Just helped quietly." Hole blinked. Caught off guard. "I never forgot that," she said. "Not everything you did was wrong. But I'm glad you're here now. Still trying to do better." He thanked her. His voice thick with emotion. "Because that's the truth of it. Isn't it? People aren't just their worst mistakes. They're the sum of all the moments that come after. The choice to own it. The choice to rebuild. The choice to keep showing up." Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Hole stayed behind to finish stacking chairs. Ella Laner watched him from the doorway. A small smile playing at her lips. "You're not who you were," she said. "I hope not," he replied. "You're not who you will be yet, either," she added. He looked at her, grateful. "Good. Because I'm not done." The truth was, he would never be done. The work of change is never finished. It's daily, constant, relentless. It demands that you get comfortable being uncomfortable. That you stand still when your instincts scream to walk away. That you apologize even when no one demands it. That you listen even when it would be easier to defend yourself. And Hole was learning to do all of that. One mistake at a time. One conversation at a time. One act of quiet, steady redemption at a time. Seasons began to change. Summer shifted into crisp, amber autumn. And with it came something Hole never expected. An invitation. The LMG Foundation was hosting its annual gala. The biggest event of the year. City officials, business owners, community leaders. All gathering to celebrate the work done. And the work still ahead. Ella Laner sent the invitation herself. Black tie optional. Attendance not. Hole stood in front of his closet that evening. Staring at his suit like it was battle armor. He wasn't afraid of the crowd. He was afraid of who he had been in front of them. But fear wasn't an excuse anymore. It was a challenge. He adjusted his tie. Looked in the mirror. And whispered. "Show up." The gala was held in a grand hall. The ceiling strung with fairy lights. The air buzzing with conversation and laughter. When Hole arrived, he felt the weight of every gaze. Some faces he recognized from seminars. Some he didn't. Some offered polite nods. A few offered nothing at all. He didn't blame them. Respect wasn't owed. It was earned. He made his way to a small table near the back. Intending to stay out of the spotlight. But Ella Laner had other plans. Halfway through the evening. After the keynote speaker. She took the stage. Dressed in midnight blue. Her silver hair gleaming. She looked every inch the force she was. "Tonight," she said. "We celebrate bridges built. Not perfect ones. Not easy ones. But real ones." The audience listened, rapt. "And I want to acknowledge someone," she continued. "Who reminds us that change isn't about erasing the past. It's about confronting it. And choosing every day to be better than you were yesterday." She paused, eyes scanning the room. Until they landed on him. "Officer Travis Hole," she said. "Would you join me?" A hush fell over the crowd. Hole froze for a second. Then stood. His legs felt heavy. But he moved forward anyway. One step at a time. Like walking through water. He climbed the stage. Stood beside her under the lights. And waited. Ella Lehner turned to him. Then to the audience. This man once made a decision that caused pain. But instead of hiding from it, he faced it. He apologized. And he chose to listen. He chose to learn. He chose to rebuild. A soft ripple of applause moved through the room. "Redemption," she said, "isn't a gift we hand to people. It's a journey we allow them to walk. And tonight, we recognize that journey." She handed him a simple plaque. It wasn't flashy. Just a piece of wood. Engraved with one line. "To those who listen, change, and keep walking." Hole accepted it with both hands. His throat tight. His heart heavier than it had ever been. But somehow lighter too. He didn't give a speech. He just nodded to the crowd. Then to her. And whispered. "Thank you." Afterward, as the guests mingled and music filled the air, Hole stood by the balcony. Looking out over the city he had once thought he understood. Now seeing it with new eyes. Ella Lehner joined him, 2 glasses of lemonade in hand. "Not bad for a rookie," she teased. He laughed, soft and genuine. "I've got a good mentor," he said. They clinked glasses. The lights of Savannah stretched out before them. Flickering like 1,000 second chances. And for the first time in a long time, Travis Hole believed in all of them. Because redemption isn't given. It's earned. Day by day. Choice by choice. Word by word. Until the sum of your actions becomes louder than the memory of your mistakes. And tonight, in the warm glow of a city learning how to heal, he wasn't just a man haunted by regret. He was a bridge. Not perfect. Not whole. But real. And building, every day, toward something better. Months passed. Winter wrapped Savannah in its soft chill. Bare trees lining the streets like quiet sentinels. Hole kept working with the foundation. Kept showing up to meetings. Kept taking notes. Kept listening more than he spoke. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't headline-worthy. But it was real. It was steady. Sometimes, people still looked at him sideways. Sometimes, forgiveness felt a million miles away. But Hole didn't flinch. He understood now. Trust isn't demanded. It's earned. Layer by layer. Moment by moment. One cold morning, Hole met Ella Lehner at the Foundation's new satellite office. A modest space set up on the west side of town. Closer to the neighborhoods that needed the work most. As they unpacked boxes of supplies, Ella Lehner handed him a folder. "Open it," she said. Inside were papers. Official city documents. Contracts, agreements. At the top, Community Advisory Board for Police Reform. His name was listed under Liaison Representative. He looked up at her, stunned. "You want me to serve," she finished. "Not lead. Not control. Serve." Hole ran a hand through his hair. Overwhelmed. "I don't know if I deserve this," he said. "Probably not," she said, smiling gently. "But you've worked for it. And that matters more." He closed the folder carefully. "Thank you," he said. Meaning it in ways deeper than words could touch. "Don't thank me yet," Ella Lehner said. "You're about to step into a fire. Not everyone wants change. Especially not from someone who once symbolized the problem. Hole nodded. I'm ready. She studied him for a moment. Then nodded back. Good. Because we've got work to do. And work they did. Community forums turned into action committees. Action committees turned into policy drafts. Policy drafts turned into training pilots. Slowly, painfully, pieces of the system began to shift. Not because of one man. But because people like Ella Lehner demanded it. And people like Hole supported it. The work was messy. Arguments flared. Progress stalled. Doubts crept in. But they didn't quit. And sometimes, in rare and beautiful moments, they saw the impact. One afternoon, after a long strategy meeting, a young cadet approached Hole quietly. Sir, he said, nervous. I just wanted to say. Your story. It's why I chose to join differently. To listen first. To check myself. Hole smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't reach your face, but sinks deep into your chest. You'll make mistakes, he said. We all do. But what matters is what you do after. The cadet nodded, eyes bright. Yes, sir. As the cadet walked away, Hole caught Ella Lehner's eye across the room. She didn't say anything. She just gave him a nod. Proud and steady. And he nodded back. Understanding. Change wasn't fast. It wasn't easy. But it was happening. One person. One choice. One hard conversation at a time. And in that slow building, something even deeper was born. Hope. Real hope. The kind that doesn't flinch when tested. The kind that grows stubborn roots in the soil of struggle. The kind that believes better is always possible. Even when it's slow. Even when it's hard. Spring returned to Savannah. The city's oaks burst back into bloom, draping the streets in soft green veils. And with it came the first official Bridge Forward Summit. A public gathering of law enforcement, community leaders, educators, and activists. Hosted by the LMG Foundation. Hole was asked to open the event. Not because he was perfect. But because he was proof. Proof that change, however imperfect, was still worth fighting for. He stood at the podium. Hands steady now. Voice clear. This isn't about one mistake, he began. Or one apology. This is about the work that comes after. The work we owe to each other. The work we owe to ourselves. He paused, scanning the crowd. Faces he knew. Faces he'd once been blind to. Faces he now saw fully. There's no finish line to this, he said. There's only the road we walk. The bridges we build. The hands we extend. The moments we choose courage over comfort. He closed his speech with a simple promise. I can't undo my past. But I can make sure my future looks different. And I invite you to walk that future with me. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It wasn't showy. But it was real. And real, Hole had learned, was enough. After the event, Ella Lehner joined him on the steps outside the venue. You did well, she said. He shook his head, smiling. We did. They stood there a while, watching families spill out onto the sidewalk. Laughter filling the warm spring air. Funny, Hole said after a moment. All this started because someone called the cops on a woman watering her flowers. Ella Lehner chuckled softly. A simple morning. A big misunderstanding. A bigger lesson. He looked at her. Gratitude written in every line of his face. Thank you, he said again. For what? For not giving up on me. Even when I gave you every reason to. Elena shrugged lightly. Someone once didn't give up on me either. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. And in that soft light, amidst the weight of all they had endured, all they had learned, all they had built, stood two people. Unlikely partners. Unlikely family. Bound not by blood alone, but by the hard, unglamorous, stubborn work of grace. The work of redemption. The work of becoming more than what the world expects you to be. The work of building something better. Together. Years passed. The LMG Foundation grew. Bridges Forward expanded to cities beyond Savannah. What began as a local initiative turned into a statewide movement. Then caught the attention of national organizations. Hull stayed with it. Not because it was easy. Because it mattered. He became a mentor to young officers. Teaching them not just about procedure, but about presence. About perception. About humanity. Your badge, he often told rookies, shouldn't make you bigger than the people you serve. It should remind you you're part of them. And he lived those words. Every shift. Every seminar. Every hard conversation. He still wore the uniform. But it wore differently on him now. Lighter. Truer. He still got challenged. Still got questioned. And he welcomed it. Because growth isn't polite. It's messy. It's humbling. It's necessary. One evening, as Hull was leaving the Foundation's main office, he found Elena sitting on the front steps, watching the sunset. He sat beside her without a word. For a while, they just watched the sky bleed from gold to violet, listening to the hum of cicadas in the trees. You ever think we'd get here? He asked. Not like this, she said. Not with you. He laughed softly. Me neither. She turned her head slightly, studying him. You've changed, she said. But not just because you had to. Because you chose to. He nodded. I had good teachers. They sat in silence again. A comfortable silence. Then Elena said something she hadn't before. Your father would be proud of you. Hull looked down at his hands. Calloused from years of work. Steady now in a way they hadn't been before. I hope so, he said. I hope you are too. She smiled. Soft and genuine. I am. He let those words settle deep inside. Rooting themselves somewhere old and broken. Somewhere now beginning to heal. Eventually, the stars began to blink alive overhead. And the cool night wrapped around them. Ready to go home? He asked. Not yet, she said. Just a little longer. And so they stayed. Two unlikely family members. Sitting on the front steps of something they had built together. Something that mattered. Something that would outlast them both. Because the real monuments aren't made of stone or steel. They're made of moments like these. Quiet, hard-won, and holy. The kind of moments where you realize redemption isn't a finish line you cross. It's the path itself. And if you're lucky, if you're willing, you find someone to walk it with. For Travis Hull and Elena Grace. The road was long. The work was hard. But the journey was worth every step. And somewhere, deep in the marrow of the city they loved, bridges stood where once there had only been walls. Because two people, one morning on a rooftop, chose to break the cycle. To see each other. To believe in something better. And that belief changed everything. Not perfectly. But permanently. In the years that followed. The story of Elena Grace and Officer T.